The rain fell hard over Lagos that night, drumming on the roof of a small hospital. Inside a dim ward, Ngozi struggled through labor, her cries filling the air. By her side, her husband Afani held her hand, his rough palms shaking. They were poor, life had not been kind. Afani once worked at a factory, but when it closed, he was left with nothing. Since then, he carried cement, pushed wheelbarrows, and begged for odd jobs. Yet the money was never enough. Rent was overdue, debts chased him, and hunger was a daily visitor. As he watched his wife fight for her life on the bed, fear pressed on him harder than the storm outside. Moments later, two cries broke the silence. Twin boys. Tiny, fragile, but beautiful. Ngozi smiled weakly, kissing one on the forehead. "God, thank you," she whispered. Ifani, however, stood by the window, the weight of tomorrow already crushing him. Two children? How will I feed them? Far away, in a mansion on Victoria Island, another couple lived with a different kind of pain. Chief and Madame Attiku had money, houses, and cars, but their home was empty. For 15 years they prayed for a child. Doctors, treatments, and long trips abroad had all failed. Madame Attiku wept quietly every night, clutching her rosary, begging God for a son. People whispered behind their backs, "So much money, but no child." Fate connected the two families. When word of the twins reached Chief Attiku, hope rose in his heart. Ifani, drowning in fear and poverty, saw an escape. Under the cover of night, while Ngozi slept exhausted, one twin was taken away. In the hospital, Ngozi woke to find only one baby in her arms. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she held the child close and whispered, "I will protect you, no matter what." In the mansion, Madame Attiku cradled the other twin, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Finally, my son," she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the beginning of two very different journeys. Morning light crept into a grand mansion on Victoria Island. Inside the nursery, the wealthy couple, Chief and Madame Attiku, stood over a golden crib. Their new son, Nonso, lay wrapped in soft cotton. A nanny sang a gentle lullaby, while Madame Attiku smiled through tears of joy. For the first time in years, their home was filled with the sound of a baby's cry. The house that once felt empty now carried life, and the couple looked at Nonso as the answer to every prayer. Across the city, in a crowded one-room apartment, Ngozi sat on a wooden stool, rocking her baby, Chaik, in an old raffia basket. The walls were cracked, and the smell of kerosene from a small lantern filled the air. She was tired, but her eyes glowed with love. She whispered softly to her son, "My child, you will not be lost in this life. You will rise." The baby's tiny hands clutched her finger. In that moment, she forgot the hunger, the debts, and the pain. All she saw was hope in his eyes. Two boys, born together but raised apart. One surrounded by wealth and comfort, the other wrapped in love and struggle. Their lives had only just begun, yet destiny was already drawing two very different paths before them. The years passed quickly, and the two boys began to grow into their different worlds. In the noisy streets of the mainland, Chaik ran barefoot with other children, chasing after old tires that rolled down dusty roads. His school uniform was faded, torn at the knees, but he wore it proudly. Each morning, he carried a small tray of puff-puff on his head, following his mother into the busy market. Traders shouted, buses honked, and Chaik weaved through the crowd, trying to sell before school. When night came, he bent over a worn notebook under the flicker of a lantern, slowly tracing his letters, determined to learn. His mother often patted his head and whispered, "Keep reading, my son. Education will open your future." Far across the city, Nonso lived a life Chaik could not imagine. Every morning, a chauffeur dropped him at a private school in a black Prado. His uniform was spotless, his shoes shining. Teachers praised him for his sharp mind, and after classes, he returned to a house filled with music, tutors, and laughter. Sometimes Madame Attiku would sit by his side as he played simple tunes on the piano, smiling proudly. Holidays took him abroad, where he saw airplanes, tall buildings, and beautiful cities that widened his dreams even more. Two boys, two worlds, both growing, both learning, yet separated by a decision made long ago. Destiny was shaping them, slowly bringing their paths closer, though neither knew it yet. By his teenage years, Chaik was no longer just a boy. He was his mother's strength. Life had grown harder. His mother's health was failing, and debts followed them everywhere. To survive, Chaik took on any job he could find. He carried heavy loads at the market, swept shops at dawn, and washed cars for strangers. Sometimes he returned home with only a few coins, but he handed them to his mother with a smile, hiding his own hunger. School became harder too. He often went without lunch, his stomach empty while other children ate. Yet when the final bell rang, he didn't rush home like them. Instead, he stayed back in the classroom, copying notes from a chalkboard before the teacher wiped it off. At night, under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, he studied with determination, whispering to himself, "I must rise. I cannot stay here forever." Even when exhaustion pulled at his eyes, he forced himself to keep reading. His mother's gentle coughs from the corner of their room reminded him why he could not stop. She often said in a weak but hopeful voice, "My son, poverty will not define you. Your mind is your way out." Chaik believed her. Even in struggle, he carried a fire within him, a fire that refused to die. While Chaik fought through hardship, Nanso's teenage years were smooth and full of opportunity. Each morning, a chauffeur opened the car door as he stepped out neatly dressed in a fine school uniform. His shoes shone, his backpack was new, and his teachers often praised him as one of the brightest in class. He joined debate clubs, spoke confidently before large crowds, and often returned home with trophies. His parents proudly displayed them in the living room, telling guests, "Our son is a leader in the making." After school, Nanso's evenings were filled with tutors, music lessons, and family dinners where laughter echoed across their mansion. On weekends, he played piano in the living room while Madame Adiku sat nearby, her eyes full of pride as she clapped softly after each piece. Summers took him abroad. He walked the streets of London, visited museums, saw tall skyscrapers and cities alive with light. The world felt wide open before him, and he believed there was nothing he could not become. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments, Nanso felt a strange emptiness. His life had everything: comfort, love, opportunity, but deep inside, he carried a feeling he could not explain, a shadow of something missing. A part of himself he did not know was out there. It was an ordinary hot afternoon in Lagos. Chaik, now almost a man, worked at a construction site, carrying sandbags and mixing cement. His shirt was torn, his hands blistered, but he pushed through the pain. Every naira he earned mattered. The sound of car horns suddenly filled the air. Workers paused as a sleek convoy of black SUVs drove through the site gates. Men in suits stepped out first, clearing the way. From one of the cars, a young man emerged, confident, neatly dressed, his wristwatch glinting in the sun. It was Nanso, visiting the site with his father, Chief Adiku. Chaik, wiping sweat from his forehead, looked up and froze. For a brief moment, his eyes met Nanso's. Something stirred inside him. The boy before him looked like his reflection, only polished and untouchable. Nanso also paused. He stared back at the young laborer, confused. There was something disturbingly familiar in the stranger's face. The same jawline, the same eyes, the same dimple that appeared when he frowned. Neither said a word. The foreman barked instructions, the SUVs rolled forward, and the moment passed. But as Chaik bent back to his work, his heart raced. He whispered to himself, "Why does he look exactly like me?" Nanso sat silently in the car, staring out the window as they drove away. He shook his head, dismissing the strange thought, but deep inside, a question lingered. For the first time, the twins had seen each other. For the first time, fate had shown its hand. Life became heavier for Chaik as he grew older. His mother's health, already fragile, began to decline. She often coughed through the night, her body weak from years of struggle. Chaik did everything he could to keep them afloat, carrying loads in the market, washing cars, working long hours at construction sites. Yet no matter how hard he tried, the money was never enough. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, his mother collapsed on their way home from the roadside where she sold food. Chaik caught her in his arms, his heart pounding in fear. He rushed her to the nearest hospital, only to be met with cold words at the reception. Deposit before treatment. He begged, pleaded, and promised to bring the money, but the nurses only shook their heads. For days, Chaik worked himself to exhaustion, running from job to job, borrowing from neighbors, but the bills were far beyond his reach. In the hospital corridor, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Chaik sat on the floor, his head in his hands. The sound of his mother's weak breathing behind the ward door cut through him like a blade. He whispered to himself, "I cannot lose her. She is all I have." But life was cruel. The harder he fought, the more helpless he felt, as though the world was determined to break him. Chaik had taken a job as a janitor at a university. Each day, he swept long corridors, emptied bins, and scrubbed classrooms. It was tiring work, but it gave him just enough money to eat and save a little for his mother's treatment. One afternoon, while mopping the floor outside the auditorium, he heard loud applause and curious voices. Drawn by the sound, he stepped inside quietly. The hall was filled with students. On stage, a debate was in full swing. At the center of the stage stood Nanso. His voice was steady, his words powerful. He spoke with confidence about leadership, about justice, about building a better society. The audience clapped and cheered with every point he made. Chaik stopped in his tracks. His heart skipped. He stared at the young man on stage, unable to look away. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same face, the same crooked dimple when he smiled. It was like staring into a mirror. Only this mirror reflected a life he could never have. Students in the crowd began whispering too, turning their heads toward Chaik. Some noticed the striking similarity. He felt their eyes on him and quickly stepped back. His hands trembled as he left the hall, his mop dragging behind him. Outside, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Who is he?" he whispered to himself. "Why does he look exactly like me?" Inside the auditorium, Nanso accepted the crowd's applause with a confident smile. But for a brief moment, he had noticed the janitor by the door. Something inside him shifted, a strange feeling of familiarity he could not explain. Their paths had crossed again. The pull of destiny was growing stronger. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and fear. Chaik sat by his mother's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall with painful effort. Her coughs were deep, her body frail, and her eyes tired from years of struggle. He held her thin hand, whispering softly, "Mama, please stay with me. Don't leave me. I will find a way to help you." His voice cracked, but he forced himself to stay strong. The doctor spoke coldly. "She needs proper treatment, and it will not be cheap." The words pierced him like a knife. Chaik had already sold the little they owned, already worked himself to exhaustion, yet the money was still far out of reach. Every day he left the hospital at dawn to labor on construction sites, sweep classrooms, or carry goods in the market. Every night he returned with coins in his pocket, never enough. At her bedside, he tried to smile, hiding his own pain. But in the quiet hours when she was asleep, he sat in the hallway with his head in his hands, tears slipping down his face. His mother's illness became the weight that crushed him and the fire that pushed him forward. He refused to accept defeat, even though the world around him seemed determined to break him. Far away, in his own world of comfort, Nanso carried on with his bright future, unaware that his own blood was fighting desperately to keep their mother alive. The day of truth was drawing closer. The hospital bills were climbing higher every day. Chaik's mother lay weak in bed, her breathing shallow, her voice fading. Chaik sat by her side one evening and whispered, "Mama, I will find a way. I promise you." Soon after, he heard of a university scholarship program funded by one of the city's wealthiest families. It was his only hope, education that could lift him from poverty and money that could help his mother's treatment. He applied with trembling hands and prayed for a chance. Weeks later, Chaik found himself in a tall office building, walking nervously into a boardroom for the final interview. His clothes were plain, his shoes worn, but his determination was strong. He took a seat at the edge of the long table, heart pounding. Then the door opened. A young man entered, sharp in a tailored suit, confidence in every step. The panel greeted him warmly. "Welcome, Nonso." Chike's eyes widened. His breath caught in his chest. Sitting across from him was the same young man he had glimpsed before, the one from the construction site, the one from the university debate. The resemblance was undeniable. Nonso paused too. For a moment, the confident smile on his face faltered. He stared at Chike, confusion clouding his thoughts. It was like looking into a mirror, only this reflection wore the marks of struggle and hardship. The room grew tense with silence. One of the board members cleared his throat, trying to continue the interview, but both young men remained locked in each other's gaze. Something deeper than chance was at work. Fate had finally seated them face to face. The boardroom was heavy with silence. Chike and Nonso sat across from each other, their eyes locked, their faces so alike it unsettled everyone present. One of the interviewers shifted uneasily and finally said what everyone was thinking. "Forgive me, but the two of you look as if you were cut from the same cloth." The words hung in the air. Nonso frowned, still staring at Chike, while Chike's heart raced in his chest. That evening, questions turned into whispers, and whispers traveled fast. Within days, the families were called together. Chike arrived at the mansion reluctantly, his plain shirt and worn shoes clashing against the marble floors and glittering chandeliers. His hands trembled, but his resolve was firm. He needed answers. In a large sitting room, both families gathered. Madame Ataku held her breath, her eyes darting between the two young men. Chike's features mirrored Nonso's so perfectly that no one could deny it. Finally, the truth broke open. An elder relative, pressured by the weight of silence, spoke. He revealed the story of that stormy night years ago. The poor father who, crushed by poverty, gave one child away, and the wealthy couple who took him as their own. Ngozi, still weak from her illness, sat in the corner with tears streaming down her face. She confessed she had always known something was missing that night in the hospital, but had lived with the silence. Chief Ataku bowed his head in shame, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Madame Ataku wept, clutching her chest. Chike's voice shook as he stood, his eyes red with tears. "All these years, I suffered. We suffered. And all this time, my own brother was here, living another life." Nonso stepped forward, his own face pale. His world of comfort seemed to crumble beneath him. "I never knew," he whispered. "I swear I never knew." The room was filled with sobs, shame, and anger, but also relief. The secret was no longer hidden. The two brothers, separated at birth, now stood in the same room, facing a truth that would change them forever. The room was quiet after the truth had been revealed. Nonso stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Chike. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I never knew. Please let me help." Chike's lips tightened. His heart was torn between anger and relief. Then a weak cough broke the silence. Their mother lay on the sofa, her hand trembling as she tried to reach out. "Both of you," she whispered, "come closer." They knelt beside her. She placed one son's hand into the other's and whispered again, "No more distance. You are brothers. Use this truth to heal, not to divide." That same night, Nonso drove Chike and their mother to a private hospital. He handled the deposit without hesitation, while doctors rushed her in for treatment. Machines hummed softly, oxygen eased her breathing, and new medicine steadied her pulse. For the first time in months, Chike saw color return to her cheeks. He stood quietly by the window, tears burning in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Nonso nodded. "We start here, and we finish together." Day by day, Ngozi grew stronger. She began to sit up, then walk short distances with the help of a nurse. The relief on her sons' faces was clear. For the first time, they shared not just the same blood, but the same purpose. Weeks later, Chike sat before the scholarship board. He wore a clean shirt, his posture upright but nervous. Nonso sat beside him, not as an interviewer this time, but as a brother. "Mr. Chike," the chairwoman said, smiling kindly, "your scores were outstanding. Your perseverance speaks for itself. We are pleased to award you a full scholarship, tuition, books, and a monthly stipend. Chike swallowed hard, his voice steady. I won't waste this chance. Outside, in the bright afternoon sun, Nonso clapped his shoulder. First day of class, I'll be there to walk you in. And he was. On the first day of lectures, Chike sat in the front row, his notebook open, his heart full of hope. Through the small window of the lecture hall door, Nonso gave him a quick thumbs up before disappearing into the corridor. In the evenings, the brothers often visited their mother. She sat by the window with a warm smile, watching her sons walking together. One night she said, "Pain brought you to this point, but love must carry you forward." On a golden evening by Lagos Lagoon Bridge, the twins leaned against the railing, the city buzzing around them. "We should start something," Nonso said. "A fund to help families who cannot pay hospital deposits. No one should suffer in a corridor the way Mama did." Chike nodded firmly. "And we will give scholarships too. Books, tutors, support. So children like me have a way out." They shook hands, not as strangers, but as brothers. Their silhouettes stood side by side against the sunset, the city glowing behind them. Two lives once torn apart had finally become one story. Brothers united, ready to change the world together. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.